Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing. Illinois is indeed home to more nuclear reactors than any other state in the nation. 11 operating, 3 decommissioned, 7,500 tons of spent fuel stored in pools, and another 900 tons in dry casks. 4 more plants pools are running out of room. So we need to find a solution. We're struggling to deal with the decommissioned nuclear power plants that have become de facto interim storage sites for this stranded nuclear waste. Without consent or compensation, these communities and plants are paying the price for the federal government's failure to find a permanent solution to spent nuclear fuel. Last Congress, I authored the Stranded Act to provide impact assistance and economic development incentives to communities burdened with storing stranded nuclear waste. My bill has 3 components. First, it establishes a federal task force to identify existing public and private resources and funding that could benefit affected communities. This policy is also included in today's bill. Second, it creates economic impact grants that would provide financial assistance to offset the economic and social impacts of stranded nuclear waste in affected communities. And third, my bill extends tax credits that will bring investment to these stranded communities. Of the 3 policies in my bill, the most critical component is the second. That is to compensate communities who are acting as interim storage sites for nuclear waste now. Mr. Fettus, do you agree that communities like Zion, Illinois, which is one of these sites, Zion and Illinois should be compensated now for storing waste?
Yes.
Thank you. Right now, my state has 1 decommissioned nuclear power plant. In a few years, it could have even more. It has several, actually. Would the kind of proposal you outlined in your testimony affect what happens in my state?
We think it would. It would give the state much more control over the terms by which that nuclear waste is going to remain in your state, which by any measure, it's going to be in the state for a long time, especially as you have all the operating reactors that Illinois has. And right now, states can essentially, as California sees in the San Onofre situation, that they have no real authority to affect that. What we outline could change that.
So, you know, I look at these communities in Illinois. Even if we say Yucca Mountain, magically, we're going to proceed with it, it's still going to be a matter of decades before this fuel could be moved. In the meantime, it sits there in Zion, Illinois. Nobody's building. It's in a lakefront on Lake Michigan, beautiful piece of property, and there's nothing they can do, and nobody wants to move there. Nobody wants to buy a house in Zion, and yet there are very good jobs at the plant that is there, and people drive in to go to, and to hold these jobs, but they drive from a long way away because nobody wants to buy a property there. So I think it's common sense that we would make these payments to the local community since they are now stuck holding this nuclear fuel that the federal government has failed to live up to in terms of dealing with it. I think we can both agree, Mr. Fettus, that it is critical that our existing nuclear fleet operates also as safely as possible.
Yes, that's NRDC's position.
I have a bill that fixed a drafting error that occurred in the Energy Policy Act of 2005, and it clarifies that whistleblower protection rights for DOE and NRC employees may be enforced as Congress intended. Do you agree that whistleblower protections, which are disputed at DOE, are of critical importance to the nuclear industry?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Do you want to elaborate a little bit more on what you were saying about the consent piece and about, I like what you said about the fact that if we need to change the model from forcing this fuel onto someone to compensating the people who are already holding it and coming up with a way for people to say yes.
Figuring out a pathway forward, Senator, I do appreciate the conundrum Congress is confronted with. This is I think it's one of the first paragraphs in almost every testimony I've written on nuclear waste that this is a devilish challenge, technical challenge, just science alone. And then you put the interplay of politics on top of it, and it gets turned into a hot potato that makes Chairman Barrasso's job or Ranking Member Carper's job extremely difficult, and in fact, every member of the Senate. But to keep trying to force a square peg into a round hole simply won't work. To give you a sense of scale, when you said if we magically had Yucca Mountain be licensed and go forward, it would still be decades for fuel across the country to get moved at various times. That's not going to happen, though. The licensing process, if this bill were to become law, would go forward, and then there would be contentious litigation for, we submit, despite any deadline, decades. And if they truncated the litigation, they'd simply open themselves up to legal challenge on that issue. So we can't urge strongly enough, there's a better way to do this that's consistent with our environmental laws.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Capito.